So if you're following along, you know what the problem is. The problem is that historically farmers have not made enough money, and I throw the air quotes out there when I say enough because what does enough money even mean? That is a normative statement. That's a value judgment. But the reason why we even have an agricultural policy class is because one day in the past, someone said farmers should be making more money and the government should get involved in order to help make that happen. And in the last video, I talked about a lot of different things, and I talked about ways that you can increase the amount of money that a farmer receives for a product. So, well, first of all, keep in mind we're primarily dealing with row crop production here. There aren't really that many agricultural policies that are centered on livestock production. And I know my audience, I know that most of my audience are going to be livestock producers here in the area that I'm in locally. But not all of them. So a lot of these policies really focus more on grain production, corn and wheat and soybeans and cotton, things that you would grow out in the field as opposed to animal production. Perhaps when we have some classroom time, we can debate as to why we think that is. But let me just start off with some market diagrams here. And let's imagine that we have a market for some agricultural crop. I don't know, it's probably corn, it might be wheat. Corn's the big thing we do in the U.S. So there's a quantity, there's a price. All right, there is a demand curve, there is a supply curve. And I'm going to put a little number 1 on these demand curves and supply curves. And that 1 is a timestamp. And we've got some price of corn. Let's call it P1. And, let's draw that a little nicer. And some quantity of corn, let's call it Q1. And the problem here is that P1 is not a price that makes us happy, us, society as a rule. People observe farmers and say, wow, the farmers should be getting more money, right? Or maybe farmers lobby and tell their politicians that they should be getting more money. Whatever the cause of it, the belief is that this price is too low. And the goal then is to get the price to go up to some higher price. How can you get the price to go up to some higher price? Well, there are several ways this can be done. One thing that can happen, let me change colors here, is we can increase the demand. So if the demand for corn goes up to demand curve number 2, what happens to the price of corn? Well, lo and behold, the price of corn goes up to P2. So that's one way that we can get a higher price of corn. So there are policies that can make that happen. And again, we'll talk much more in detail about this throughout the course of the semester. This is just kind of a primer to get you started. So that's one option, right? Now the quantity will go up as well, so let's point that out as well. And that kind of makes sense because if the demand goes up, that means there's people out there buying more of it. So one thing we can do is we can increase the demand. So if we can find some way to increase the demand for whatever it is that we're producing, the price will go up. Basic economics 101 kind of stuff. Let's take a look at another situation. So here we have our usual diagram. We're going to get sick of drawing this diagram. This is our tool, right? This diagram here is how we think about problems. We've got a demand curve. Let's call it D1. We got a supply curve. Let's call it S1. And we have some price, P1, and some quantity to go with it, Q1, here at the equilibrium. So we have an equilibrium. And again, the belief is that at that equilibrium price, farmers aren't receiving enough for their crop. What else can we do? Well, here is one option. We can find some way to push the supply curve in to some supply curve like this one, S2. So if we could shift the supply curve in, then we would end up with a higher price. Right here it is, P2. So we have some policies that are designed to kind of pull back the supply so that farmers produce less. Q2 to go along with it. We get less stuff made. So that's kind of the second thing we can do. We can stimulate demand. We can pull the supply curve back. These are the kind of things we can do in order to change the price of what the farmers receive out there in the real world. Let's turn the page. This technology is so neat. We'll turn the page. And let's do another example. Let's go to the white color here. And let's draw another market diagram. Okay. Quantity goes here, price goes here. Demand curve, supply curve. As always, I'm going to give my ones here that are timestamps and a price P1. That is our timestamp. I could call this PE for the equilibrium price because it is the price at the equilibrium, and we get some quantity with it. Now let's think about what else we could do to raise the price. One of the things we could do is we could simply say to the farmers that the price is going to be higher. And we'll take care of things to make sure that works out so the price is higher. So what we might do is we might say, okay, we're going to guarantee that you can get P2 out in the marketplace. So we draw a dotted line over. Actually, let me change these ones here to an E for equilibrium, because I think that's the better way to present this. So let's make this an E and this an E here. I should have changed that to a different color, but these are the equilibrium prices where we're going to start. So P1 is our starting equilibrium price, whereas P2 is, for the lack of a better word, a target price. Let's just call it the price with a smiley face, and that's the price that whoever it is who's setting up this policy thinks the price should be, the price they think that will make the farmer happy, a happier price than the low equilibrium price. This little pen doesn't always draw properly. And the thing I want you to notice about this new higher price is that this price is not at an equilibrium. And as an economist, I look at that and I go, uh-oh, something's wrong here, okay? The equilibrium is very important because it is a natural place that we tend to kind of gravitate toward. And we've got a situation here where we're not at the equilibrium. Let me show you what I mean. So this is the demand curve here. Let me go back to, let's stay with this color. So here's our demand curve, and here's our price, and this is the point where the price line crosses the demand curve. We draw a dotted line down, and we call that point QD. That is the quantity demanded at this new higher price. Back to the price, dotted line over to the supply curve, dotted line down. This is the quantity supplied, and what I want you to notice is that the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded at P2, right? At that price, the amount of corn, this is corn, that our farmers want to grow is greater than the amount of corn that people want to buy at that price. And this is important because it's that price that matters. When the corn gets really expensive, people aren't as excited about buying it. And this is important to remember. Who are the people who are buying corn? So we're talking about field corn. Go out into the field. We're not talking about sweet corn that you would actually buy and eat like corn on the cob. This is the stuff that we grind up and feed to animals, the stuff that we use for making ethanol. It has tons of other industrial uses. You can buy cups made out of corn-based plastic and the cups will biodegrade. Tons of uses for corn. But it's primarily used for feeding animals and for ethanol, right? Even if we don't run E85, there's a little bit of ethanol in all your gas as an anti-knock agent. We used to use lead as an anti-knock agent, and lead, of course, is a bad idea. It's not very good for the environment. It's very toxic. So we switched to ethanol for an anti-knock additive. But we've got more corn produced than we're going to use at that price. And that is a problem, and this is kind of what I mean when I say that when you try to fix the problem, you create some other problem, and you kind of kick that problem down the road. This distance right here has a name. You might remember it. This is a surplus. So when the government steps in and just says, hey, we're going to set the price higher and we're going to find some scheme to guarantee the farmer is going to get more money for their crop, we end up creating a surplus. And it's really kind of common sense if you've had just any kind of basic economics. And the way I like to think about this is really simple. When a thing gets to be very expensive, you're not excited about buying it. When a thing is expensive, you're going to look at what are alternatives. What else could I buy that will get the job done that I might be able to spend a little less money on? What else can I buy that might be better and spend the same money? People look for alternatives when the price goes up. And so if the price of corn goes up, people look at this and say, you know, I've been feeding my cattle corn. Guess what? They'll eat wheat too. Absolutely. Large chunks of the world use wheat as a feed grain. We typically use corn as a feed grain here in the U.S. But when we look at Europe, Europe primarily uses wheat as a feed grain. Canada grows a lot of wheat, and a lot of it's as a feed grain. Now, we use wheat for bread, but we use corn for things that we eat too. So there are other things a person can buy. If the corn gets expensive, they'll switch to something else. There are tons of other ways you can feed animals. You don't need corn. If corn gets too expensive, you just feed them hay and you don't give them any corn, right? That's kind of what that's what cows were born to eat, right? They're foragers. And on the other side of this is over here on the supply side of the equation, right? The law of supply says that when the price goes up, the quantity will go down. Nope. I have to edit that part out because that's wrong. The law of supply says that when the price goes up, the quantity supply goes up. When things get more expensive, the farmers growing this thing get more excited about growing it. They're going to plant more of it. They're going to put more fertilizer on it. They're going to make more of it. They're going to follow that law of supply. And what we have basically here is this dual action where the consumer is pulling back as the price goes up and the producer is hitting the gas as the price goes up. And we drive away from that equilibrium where we kind of agree on what we should be producing. Now comes the question, what do we do with that surplus? That's, what do we do? Because it's there. And if you want the price to stay at that higher price, you've got to do something with that surplus. And so what do we do? Well, let's talk about that in the next video.